we want to get into this today, talking about the what and the how of baptism, specifically in, and this is the controversial part, when we a few times a year do baptisms in the same service that we call people to faith.
Yeah.
People that were not ready to get baptized that day, they had not been counseled before that day, they certainly hadn't walked through a 6-month process before that day, and yet they didn't know that morning, but there were prayer warriors that were asking, and God gave the fruit, and they got in the water that day to align their life in obedience with God's call, to take that first step of obedience. We did a whole podcast on this. I'm not going to go all the way back through it. We did a whole podcast on sort of the why of this.
Yeah.
We feel like we step into an incredibly biblical tradition. I would not say that a church that doesn't ever do this or puts great distances between the salvation moment and baptism is, I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong or something like that. But I would certainly say that it's kind of ironic that many of those churches would say that what we do is wrong, only because like the biblical record is like every single person that we have record of their baptism in the whole Bible happened pretty much right after they got saved, you know? So it's just, man, we step into this biblical lineage in Acts. People get saved, they get baptized. There's a lot of people that push back on that go listen to the other podcast. Today we want to get into the how of that, because it doesn't just happen.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go. Hey everybody, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. If you've been enjoying the podcast so far, we want to invite you to our conference coming up in September. We know that multiplication, sending, and discipleship is the goal of the church. People generally don't have a problem saying that. But what we have found is that the ultimate input for the output of sending is growth. Many times we get so focused on the output of sending that we forget to put any emphasis at all on the input of growth. And that's why we're here. We want to help shift the narrative towards growing and going, and that's what we'll spend the bulk of our time on at the conference, with practical strategies and insights that bring discipleship, sending, and growth back together. Click the link to get your spot, September 17th and 18th. We'll see you there.
All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to the Breaking Barriers podcast. My name is Pastor Andrew. I'm here today with Pastor Brant, who really is over a lot of age-based ministry stuff at Mercy Hill, but also really has his hands around kind of the idea of baptism and how we prepare for that, and some of the processes for that. So some of the campus stuff falls under him. So we're going to get into that today. Just so you know, Breaking Barriers is a ministry that is all about helping churches grow so they can go. One of the things we say all the time is that churches can grow without going. That happens. I mean, people can build churches out of a lot of different ways, but man, you can grow without going. You cannot go without growing. If you want to be a reproducing church that is in some sustainable way sending people out, whether that be to the nations or planting other churches, you've got to be in a growth pattern. And we think it's possible, man. We think that, yes, God does it, but man, we can work every single day and we can pray for the right things and we can do the right inputs. I think that for Breaking Barriers, like if a church is not hungry and driven to want to grow and see things happen, then it's like, man, we can't help you. But if you are driven and hungry for that stuff, then a lot of the things that we're talking about are very practical ways that we can help. Brant, man, you grew up in a tradition much like mine, but a little even more so in terms of the independent leading. How was baptism talked about? Were people pushed to it? Give us a little bit of your background when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, I mean, just my church background, grew up in Independent Baptist Church, and it was very much, it was like nodded to, but it was very much like it felt separate from the salvation moment a lot of times. It's like, hey, like somebody would trust in Christ, and then, sometimes they never get baptized. Sometimes, they do get baptized, but it would happen maybe they would do it like once or twice a year or something, and it was kind of nodded to, rather than seeing it as like, hey, this is a first step of obedience. This is a catalyst towards your growth in the future, and something that was like recognized but not celebrated is almost the way I would say it.
Yeah, I grew up in a church a little bit similar to that. Certainly it was something that was talked about, and there was good theology around it, I would say. Yeah. But like, even to your point, it normally happened on a Sunday night service, which we don't even do them anymore because people don't go to that. But it's like, man, it was happening on a Sunday night service. Half the crowd would be there. It sometimes felt, Bobby will say this in the Weekender, it felt a little funeral-ish rather than like wedding.
Yeah.
And we've tried to flip some of that culture, and we want to bring excitement, and we think there is no greater testimony for the unbeliever, for the church to remember their own salvation experience than to experience baptism, to see it happening. We feel like in the same way that when you go to a wedding and you think about the day that you were there, when you see a baptism, it does the same thing.
Yeah, it was a weird feeling. One of the first times that I came here, I've been here a little over 8 years now, and one of the first few services we did baptisms, and everybody started cheering as somebody got baptized, and I'm looking around like, whoa, what's going on? Like this, it's awesome. Like it's like the way it should be. But it just felt like, because I did grow up where it's like it was very formal. It was very like, this is a process, and this is something like that you're a part of, but you're like watching, and you're not like on the team almost.
Yeah. Well, we want to get into this today, talking about the what and the how of baptism, specifically and this is the controversial part, when we a few times a year do baptisms in the same service that we call people to faith.
Yeah.
People that were not ready to get baptized that day, they had not been counseled before that day, they certainly hadn't walked through a 6-month process before that day, and yet they didn't know that morning, but there were prayer warriors that were asking, and God gave the fruit, and they got in the water that day to align their life in obedience with God's call, to take that first step of obedience. The thing, we did a whole podcast on this. I'm not going to go all the way back through it. We did a whole podcast on sort of the why of this.
Yeah.
We feel like we step into an incredibly biblical tradition. I would not say that a church that doesn't ever do this or puts great distances between the salvation moment and baptism I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong or something like that. But I would certainly say that it's kind of ironic that many of those churches would say that what we do is wrong, only because like the biblical record is like every single person that we have record of their baptism in the whole Bible happened pretty much right after they got saved, you know? So it's just, man, we step into this biblical lineage in Acts. People get saved, they get baptized. And so we've talked about that. There's a lot of people that push back on that go listen to the other podcast. Today, we want to get into the how of that, because it doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
Right? There is a lot of planning that goes into these days. We don't do this every time, but these days where we call people and give them the opportunity right then and there. The first thing that comes to mind when I start thinking about planning, this is going to be a very practical podcast. Somebody that might say, hey, we've never done this. We want to do it. Okay, boom. Here's the resource.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do. All right. The first thing is you have to structure a service in the way that's going to give you the call for baptism and enough time, to confirm someone is a believer or not and get them changed and get them back in. So you want to talk a little bit about sort of how we'll structure a service still in the hour and 15, hour and 20 minute. How are we structuring that to give us the time between the pastor's call and the first person that actually gets in the water?
Yeah, I mean, I think practically speaking, I'm working with your services team or whoever's the planning person for that, is we always shorten the front end. So the front end is always shortened to allow that the pastor still the time to be able to preach and the block for that, but also really to be able to allow the worship team, and they always should have one in their back pocket too, of like, hey, if this goes, expectant of a response. I think that's the key too, is like, hey, like if you're not planning out your service expecting a response, like where is faith in that? Like so it's like for us, we want to plan expecting there to be a response, and we want to plan for a larger worship set on the back end. Generally, what happens is the pastor, usually you, Andrew, or whoever's preaching that weekend, they'll give that first big push, that first big call to respond in that moment. They'll let everybody know, like, hey, we're going to stand. We're going to worship together. The altar's going to be open. Generally, we also have other scheduled baptisms for that day. Right. So it's not like just, hey, there's nobody going. They're actually going to be able to see other people get baptized as a model for them, too. But, that pastor sets it up of like, hey, now it's time to respond. And so what we want to do is then create the time in there where there's there's either one or two worship songs. The ones that have already been scheduled, they're going. And that way it doesn't feel like this awkward moment where it's like, well, no one's getting baptized. We're kind of staring around and everything, but there's actually baptisms going on. And then the worship leader is always within a few of those moments going to be giving another invitation, to be able to, hey, like step out, take this opportunity to go and have a conversation with somebody that, the Spirit's moving, believing that He is.
Yeah. So you have, so we're going to shorten the service. So generally we'll go one song. Sermon, big call. I'm going to get into what that call is, and we'll talk about some of the real specifics around that, right? And then we're going to have planned probably 3, but I love what you said about having one in the back pocket.
Yeah.
Because I've been in that situation, man, where God started moving, people are getting baptized, and then you realize the worship team doesn't have another song. I take that as that's my response. I didn't cast enough vision for them. To say God's going to do something crazy here. And so they weren't ready for that.
Yeah.
Now that's only happened like once, because after that it's always like,
didn't happen again.
We better have another song in the back pocket because we're expecting God to do something, and that time gets extended. And this has happened before too. And we're going to get into more of the practical of how and all that, but this has happened before too. We got to be okay with at times. Hey man, there's a counseling situation that's running long because maybe it's not. Spontaneous baptisms, if you want to call them that, they're normally for very cut and dry issues.
Yeah.
Somebody goes back to the counselor, which we're going to talk about equipping counselors, and they say, man, I've been a believer for 10 years. I've never been baptized.
Yeah.
I got baptized as a 2-year-old baby. I've been saved since I was 7.
Yeah.
That's a good category. Someone else is like, hey, man, I just placed faith in Christ like right now. I've been coming to the church for 6 months. I placed faith in Christ. Oh, really? Tell me about that. It doesn't take to understand if someone has prayed to receive Christ or not. Generally, it doesn't take that long. If it does, then 2 things happen. Number 1, man, we just don't do it right then.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, man, this is no big deal. We're going to have a pastor meet with you this week. Great. Like, let's talk about this. This is nothing but good.
Yeah.
You stood up and walked out. You're thinking about baptism. God's doing something in your life. There's that other category, though, of it takes a little bit longer, but we can still get it done. We've had situations where we just close the service down and tell everybody to hang out.
Yep.
And wait for a few minutes, and people do.
Yeah. And that usually happens, I would say like at least once a year, like where it's like, hey, like the service, we've done the extra song, we've made invitations for people to come. There's a situation where, right as service is ending, it's like, hey, this person's ready. And in that moment, we're like, if they're ready, unless there's a service right behind it, which we run 2 morning services, we'll push them to the next service. But if not, we'll say like, hey, we'll make an announcement at the end of service. Feel free. And we use the screens in that way a lot of times in the back of the service to be able to communicate with the person up front, as well, so they know how many people are in baptism. That's a really important part. The communication between your baptism team, your production booth, and your person on stage, whether it's the worship leader or the service host. That's a big deal because it has an opportunity with so many moving parts of that to go off.
Yeah, totally. And we have a lot of people listening to this that maybe they don't have a production booth. They don't have, man, we didn't have that stuff in the beginning.
Yeah.
We still did this, and basically we just used runners.
Yeah.
You got somebody at the stage that's kind of waiting to see what's happening in the room. One of the guys comes running up. Hey, man, we got 3 changing. All right, great. That's awesome. We got 2 people being counseled. Okay, great. That's awesome. Like you're telling the worship leader, like, hey, man, let's keep it going for a few minutes. We got some people. So communication is key. Doesn't have to be high tech.
That's great.
People have cell phones now. There's a lot of ways to do that. Let's talk about this for a minute. Okay, so people are going to get called out in the service. Go to the back. You're gonna meet somebody there. I always say this. They're going to be smiling.
Yeah.
They're nice. They're not even our staff most of the time. It's just going to be normal Joe Blow, group leader Christians. Okay. Yep. And they just want to talk to you about your faith. What have they been? What have they done? What have our counselors gone through to get them ready for that moment?
Yeah.
When they come and they get ready to have these gospel conversations, because sometimes people get saved in that conversation.
Yeah.
But so they got to be really ready for this. What are we doing to prepare them?
Yeah, so one of the things our connections director actually has been working on too is just building out some videos for training for them to be able to go through, and things like how do you navigate these conversations? What are you looking for? What are you not looking for? Mm-hmm. What's something that should cause you to pause versus like what's something? Hey, this is very simple, like what you mentioned earlier. So I think just some like basic training. I also think though a lot of it, I think there's a training piece, but I think it's also the right who's. It's like not anybody is ready at your church to be a baptism counselor.
Right.
They may not have the EQ for it. They may not have the biblical understanding for it. And so generally speaking, though, like if your group leaders, Sunday school teachers, depending on what your model is, your elders, if your elders can't navigate a situation like that, I think that's an amazing training opportunity. But the trust would be is that those group leaders and elders, they understand, what are the basics of the faith and what do we need to be walking somebody through. And I think it's really important too, and we can talk about what are we actually expecting somebody to be able to say and know and understand. And I think sometimes, that's even a pushback on spontaneous baptisms too. But I think the way that we do it actually helps us to think about what is the basis of the gospel.
Well, let's get into that one second. I want to go back to one thing you said because I think it's very important. You didn't just say theology, you said EQ.
Yeah.
Because there's an aspect of this that is very pastoral or personal, or there needs to be a touch involved. Like it's not just black and white. Yes, you're in. No, you're out. There is a very human element to. It's a very vulnerable conversation. People they're opening their spiritual lives up, and truthfully, anytime we do, there are people that don't like getting told no. And we tell people no every single time. Every single time we baptize. Sometimes those things are hard, so you don't want to make them any harder than they need to be.
Yeah.
So the EQ thing is a big deal. All right. Let's talk about what you were saying now. So, what are we looking to hear? Somebody comes to the back. God's been working in their life. What are the things that we're looking for them to be able to articulate about their experience?
Yeah, I've tried to simplify. I feel like you've done a great job this even from the pulpit of helping to understand when we preach, what does it mean to become a believer? And even as we think about the questions that we ask in front of everybody, they really get down to what are the basics of what it means to trust in Christ.
Right.
So we ask these two questions to everybody who gets baptized. Do you believe that Jesus has done everything necessary for your salvation? And will you follow him as Lord of your life? And it's like, what we want to hear kind of preemptively to that is kind of the entering question is tell me what God's been doing in your life. Tell me why you want to get baptized. And that's kind of getting to the heart level. A lot of times that'll bring up some maybe misunderstandings about what baptism is. And be able to bring those out, and correct those, in the moment, or see the need for maybe a further conversation. But if somebody's
turning over a new leaf, I just came out of a bad breakup. Those are it's like,
I just need a fresh start.
I need a fresh start. That's well, maybe we need to, let's keep talking about this. This is not exactly what this is.
Yeah, yeah. Or and even hey, I saw somebody else do this. Right. You see that a lot of times, especially with younger kids and stuff too. But which we can talk about. But I think for us, it's we're looking for, does this person have God's got a draw in their life? There's something from their story that God, they have a draw to I want to trust in Christ as my Savior. I've understood my sin, and I've understood Him as my only way of salvation, and I want to give my life to Him. And hearing that from their story, hearing their understanding of what baptism is, and then asking those two questions. And generally speaking, a lot of times it is cut and dry. It's man, they had a story that I was this, God's been doing this. They're able to understand, hey, this is me showing others what God has done in my life, and they're able to answer those two questions, yes. And I'm just and you probably talked about this in your spontaneous baptism podcast too, of just the understanding of what more are we asking for? If we're asking for more than that, we're really asking for more than what the Bible requires of what baptism is, and we may, if we're not careful, become a stumbling block to somebody's faith.
Right. Yeah, I did. I think what you're getting at is that whole idea of the analogy I used is in a marriage, you don't say to somebody, hey, go live as if you're married, and if you guys can make it for 6 months and show us that you're legit, then we'll marry you.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you say is hey, let's go ahead and have the wedding, and then we'll live like we're married, because the wedding is going to be a very powerful symbol that you draw upon to stay married.
That's right.
And so I think that's totally, man. All right, so just moving along, I want to make sure we're very practical in this podcast. So, and again, I'll give my speech in a second that I normally do, but the idea is, hey, do you want to get saved today? Here's salvation. Or, man, did you get baptized as a baby, but you've been a believer for a long time? Or did you get, whatever. All right, so people are now moved.
Yeah.
And man, the band has come up, and now is the time. Don't wait. Go now. Go to the back. You're going to be, okay, they're now with the counselors. The counselors have been trained at this point long before. We know what they're listening for. Okay. Yeah. Now, let's go two different directions.
Okay.
The first one's easy. All right. Hey, man, this is a slam dunk. This person needs to get baptized.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. What happens then?
All right, so then we celebrate it with them, and we begin to move them to the Death to Life T-shirt, or sometimes we've done different ones. But generally speaking, it's a Death to Life T-shirt that we have for everybody that gets baptized. It's a kind of a power of moments that with them. We have everything that they need. And so we have shorts, we have T-shirts, we have hair dryers, we have everything that towels, anything somebody would need for that. We give them opportunity to go to the restroom, get changed. Guest experience person then walks them from where they change to the worship space. They're communicating with the person up front there of how many people are coming in.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, on the days, and it's not. I mean, some days it can be overwhelming. We've had that. Praise God. But generally, the person that counseled them is with them.
Yeah, they walk with them.
They stay with them the whole way, right?
Yeah.
So they're going over there with them, and they're standing in line with them, and they're kind of,
Yeah, and it's really cool. I mean, even like a lot of times you'll see a few people come out together, and like the one person's getting counseled and everything, and they end up walking up front together. They walk them up front, and then we're looking for timing cues with lighting and everything. We have an elder up there. Our elders are part of the baptisms at our church. But the way that we do it is our elder will ask the two questions, and the elder will then they'll baptize them, or we'll have another believer that was impactful in their life to baptize.
Right.
So if you get somebody, college student, their friend led them to Christ, they're getting baptized today. Their friend may be the one who baptizes them. The elder will ask them the two questions.
Right.
They'll baptize them. Our team they jump on top of, for one of the things for us, just a quick tip is like the towel is not only for like drying them off, it's also for their modesty. And so, you get
both men and women.
Both men.
Yeah, for sure,
yes,
dude.
Yes. So for everybody, right? So the last thing you want, you're taking pictures, of people, as they're getting baptized. They're on the video screen. They're up in front of everybody. And there's some type of like something that happens that just ruins their day and and it's like it takes away from the moment. Excellence, in my opinion, in that regard, means that we're guarding that person's modesty. And so our guest experience person actually will wrap that towel around them, in between them and the audience. And the purpose of that is just to guard their modesty, guard the moment. They'll then walk them back out to get changed again. And then once they come out from getting changed, we have a just kind of a power moments kind of gift for them. Just to kind of tell them like how awesome like of a day it is. You're trying to create a moment. I mean, that's one of the biggest things with baptism. It's like it is the power of all power of moments,
right.
And so it's like, man, thinking about what God's doing, what are those little things that we can do to be able to help create like, hey, this is a memory, this is a marker in your life. And so they'll get like a 4x6 with their picture on it that'll be sent to them. But in that moment, they also get a gift from us. And then we talk about follow up and everything.
We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, so that pretty much walks you through. And again, you can communicate with our team. If you get on our private Facebook page for Breaking Barriers, we can post anything in terms of like ratios of how many shirts you need to buy and how many, and shorts and all that stuff. So we got to do all that. But not everybody's a yes.
Yeah.
Some people are a no or I guess they're all pretty much, we need to keep talking about this if they're not getting baptized that day. Man, let's talk about how that conversation goes. I mean, that's tough. Yeah. It's a hard thing, but we want to try to make it a positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the most important thing in that, I think it's for the person that's doing the counseling to recognize that God is moving in the person's life. Like the person would not be there if God was not doing a work. And so we want to celebrate that. We want to celebrate the conversation. And so the way that we think about it is it's not no, it's not yet. And so how do we help them to understand, hey, there's a couple things, God's doing a great work in your life. But we feel like there's a few things that we want to help you understand a little bit better. And we want to walk alongside of you in that. And so what we would say is, again, just, hey, it's not no, it's just a not yet. And we want to walk alongside you in the next season to talk more about that. And so what we would do is get their information and then we would follow up with them. We have something called Foundations, which people that get baptized and people that don't get baptized go through.
So this is now we're kind of merging two conversations. Yeah. This is also the follow-up that we ask people to step into after they're baptized.
Yeah.
And talk to us about Foundations.
Yeah, so the purpose of Foundations, I mean, it's pretty simple. Any basics of the faith kind of class, things like that you've done, you've seen kind of all over the place that churches do. It's not anything that's like radical special about us. But what we try to do is we generally have an elder that leads that, and they have a class for people that have just gotten baptized or people that we're not quite ready yet, but let's talk about that. And we want to make sure you understand the step that you are taking. And so we'll connect them into that class, and they'll walk through that. And then out of that class may get baptized, the next season. And so, we try to again, push people to a next. So the worst thing I feel like we could do to somebody, one of the worst things is like to say, hey man, you're not ready yet. And just leave it.
And that's it. Yeah.
And it's like, it's like, man, they feel like God's doing a work on their heart.
Right.
And you're just like, yeah, man, you're not ready yet. It's like, for what? Like, and so I think we as a church have a responsibility to come alongside of them and help them to be able to move in steps.
And foundations, from what I understand too, is that what you're describing is for adults. There's a foundations that like the student team would run their own.
They have their own foundations.
And does college run their own?
I think college is actually doing it with adults right now.
Now they are, okay, because I know when they first started, they were trying to do their own.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's really good. So that's for the believer, for the non-believer. What's one quick thing some of that's been formed and shaped by our campus pastor in Espanol.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that he kind of helped us with. He had done some stuff in Cuba. And so anyway, that's just kind of cool. So, all right, one of the things I think we got to hit is, do we baptize in the moment children? And that's a tough question.
That's a tough question.
I want to just pose it to you straight, man. Give us the skinny on it. Do we do that? What happens when we do that? All that.
We have, and we've had a lot of conversations with kids staff over the years, with the kids staff around this, and there's varying views on it. And I understand, kids it's like it's the same, but it's not the same. Kids have to make the same decision that adults have to make. The basis of the gospel are the same, but you also are dealing with some cognitive development and understanding that I think requires a little bit more conversation and a little bit more just kind of diving into it with that child. So one of the things like we try to tell parents too is like slow is not bad,
right? Like
especially with kids, like slow is not bad. We want to balance. We don't want if a kid understands it. So it's slow is not bad. And at the same time, if a kid understands the gospel, we do not want to prevent them. Mm-hmm. Like if they would say, answer those two questions, have an understanding of the gospel, we don't want to prevent them from getting in the water. We don't want to be a stumbling block to their growth and what God may do through that. And I think for us, one of the things, this was really a burden on my heart years and years ago, and I worked with our kids staff on developing a gospel conversation guide. I looked all around on life, a bunch of different places. And I'm like, I didn't see anything that I really liked. And so I was like, well, if you don't see anything you like, you just make it yourself. So we did that and created it. And basically the point of it is it's got about 10 or 15 questions on it. But it's a little bit more exhaustive than the 2 questions that we do with adults because it's a little bit more difficult to understand and be able to have that conversation and to get a kid's understanding fully out in that conversation. And so they're open-ended questions that we ask, who is God? What is sin? Things like that to help them, to kind of bring out what do they know about this. And then, with parents, say, with non-spontaneous baptisms, we give parents that ahead of time. So they sign up, we give them that. We encourage them to talk through it with your kids before we have the baptism counseling conversation. But in those spontaneous baptisms, we'll walk through that. And then we'll also give that to the parent. So say the kid's not ready, which a lot of times they're not. I wouldn't say I wouldn't put a ratio on. I'm not 100% sure, but we would give that to the parent. We would say, hey, here's some of the conversation we had. Here's some of the things we encourage y'all to keep talking about. And we would love to continue this conversation.
I think that's good, man. I do think, and I just want to maybe mention this, I feel like that can sound like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth because you say slow is not bad. Yeah. And yet what we're doing is doing a podcast on why and how we do spontaneous baptism. Yeah. The thing I would say though, that is just, again, it's just very obvious, is man, there's not one example of a child being baptized in the whole New Testament. Yeah. So it's I have a way more of I'm not really, let's be slow here. I'm not really sure when it comes to a kid who I don't have one example of someone being baptized. I know they baptized their whole house. We have no idea what that means in terms of who was there, how many kids were there. We don't know, right? It's an argument from silence. So, I think the spontaneous thing, generally speaking, is way more in the adult category where it can be a little clearer. Now, a kid is harder. It's harder. An adult is harder in the sense that they can deceive you very easily.
Yeah.
A kid's harder in the sense that they may have a hard time articulating, or maybe it's even hard to understand them.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion, like, dude, God's going to separate the sheep from the goats. I don't have the job of like, man, I'm putting a lie detector test on you whether you truly are a Christian.
Yeah.
As for an adult, if someone wants to deceive me, like Simon the sorcerer deceived, you could probably do that.
Yeah.
You could walk through our stuff. I want to get baptized today. I'm deceiving you guys. You could probably do that. You lie, you do whatever. And God's going to sort that stuff out. I don't think it changed what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Because I can't know that. With a kid, it's harder because it's not, I don't think they're being deceptive. It's more just like, man, what do they really understand about this? And so, in my own household, we've been very slow. Three of my kids have been baptized, and they were baptized at a relatively young age, but it was probably a year and a half of them asking to be baptized before we actually did it.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's one of the reasons that, like, we try to make sure there's also like kids training on this. So like our kids staff leads in the kids baptism counseling, even spontaneous baptisms. They're on call for that and ready to be able to be available because they have more experience with it. And I think also, again, just we lean slow. And so if there's any like, hey, I've got a little bit of a pause, I've got a little bit of a check, I'm not quite sure, we're always going to lean slow with the kid to be able to say like, hey, let's have the conversation with the parent, let's equip them, and let's recircle this. Yeah. Rather than having it where it's like, we're not just going through like, hey, dunking these kids.
So I think a big part of this is the call, right? And so I think we should talk about that for just a minute. I was greatly affected probably 15 years ago. I heard a podcast from a very prominent pastor in North Carolina where he I guess it wasn't a podcast, it was like a little video thing or something, but it was some teaching from him. And man, he just made the point that I just made. It's not up to us to separate the sheep from the goats.
Yeah.
It's up to us, I think, to do a faithful job in calling and in asking the questions, and just trying to be very upfront. And so he basically was saying we need to be more forthright and appealing, and we just need to be more powerful in the call moment. I think that some of us are so afraid of manipulating someone that we don't even want to call them. And I just kind of agreed with this pastor. Like, I'm not sure that if I'm doing something intentionally manipulative, that's one thing. Yeah. But doing something that's very passionate for a powerful moment where we believe, dry bones are going to live. Yeah. I don't see that as manipulative. So we try to do a very good like call in that, appeal, invitation, however you want to say it. So a couple thoughts about that. Number one, I would say, and I got this directly from him, on these days, I try to give myself a very high percentage of my time towards the invitation. The last thing you want to do is have 40 minutes, you preach 37 minutes, and then try to do an appeal. Yeah. No. The appeal is at least 12 minutes of that. Yeah. Maybe 15. I mean, your sermon's shorter, the appeal's longer. So you want to make sure you have time for that stuff. The second thing I would say is it's very important to let people know that we're ready for them. So, 100%. The whole idea of like, man, we have what you need. There are people that have been praying for this. We're ready for you. Yeah. Your friends are going to wait for you, or we got new friends for you. I always do that joke. That kind of appeal in that moment of letting people know, man, we are ready. God brought you here for this reason. Here's the logistics of how it's going to happen. Yeah. The other thing I think is really important on that call is to try to let people know that if they feel like they can just do this later, that is not the Lord talking to them. Yeah. Right? Because why would God want you to continue robbing him of his glory that he should receive in the public profession of your faith? Yeah. So if what you're saying is in your head, man, I can just do this later, that's probably spiritual warfare. It's certainly not of the Lord. Yeah. If you're a believer that's living an unbaptized life, then God would want you to do it that day, Yeah. I think one thing that is good to acknowledge also is that there are going to be a lot of people in churches all around North Carolina that were baptized or sprinkled as babies. Yeah. they don't know how to really think about that. They're
Yeah.
like, man, how are my parents going to feel about this if I get? And what we try to tell them is, number one, I'm not trying to lie, I have no idea how your parents are going to feel about this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But something about the path that they were trying to put you on by sprinkling you, you're confirming today.
Yeah.
Now, it may not be, I don't know how they're going to feel about it, but man, they wanted you to follow the Lord. This is following the Lord. We feel like biblically speaking. And so, jump on and do it today. And then the last thing is, man, we just try very hard in that moment to go very passionate, man, appeal hard on right now.
Yeah.
Right now is the time.
Yeah.
Here is what it's the Philippian, it's an Ethiopian eunuch. Man, right now, here's water. Right now.
Yeah.
There's no reason to wait. There's not one good reason to wait.
I think, just thinking about that, it sounds like a couple things to me. I think one is, like, do you as a pastor or, whoever's the preacher, do you believe that this is the best thing for the people that you're preaching to? Right. Like the people that God has brought into the congregation that day, do you believe like it is best for them that they would respond if God's moving on their heart that day in that moment? Mm-hmm. And if you do, then it doesn't feel manipulative.
Not right.
Because you're pushing them passionately to like what you believe is God's best for them. Mm-hmm. So like heart motivation should overflow into, man, we don't apologize. And honestly, like, man, you always, too passionate, it's creating too much of a moment or whatever. It's like, who cares?
Right.
Like, we're called to like honor the Lord with a heart posture that is for the people to come to faith and to walk out obedience. And so, man, I think just the confidence of the pastor in that. I think the other thing that you do in that is like what you were describing is you're anticipating their objections.
Yeah.
And so, what you've done is it's like, man, the first objection, man, I wasn't prepared. I don't have clothes. We got them. Oh, my hair. Oh, we got hair dryers. Great, that's awesome. Oh, the people aren't gonna stay with me. Oh, no, don't worry about that. We'll find you new friends, right? It's all of those. Even the like, somebody wrestling with, hey, I was sprinkled as a child or something like that. What you're doing as a pastor in that appeal moment is you're passionately pushing them to make the decision, and you're anticipating the objections that they may have and helping them to work that out. And I think that's just the role of a pastor is like, what are the things that they're feeling? And I'm helping them process that so that they can make the decision that God's putting on their heart to make.
Yep, that's exactly right. Man, let's leave it there. Hey, guys, this is the kind of stuff that we talk about all the time. This is what it's about, practical ways to honor the Lord in growing our churches so that we can send people on church plants into the nations. If this is interesting to you, man, share it with somebody. And also, I would say, come to the conference. We have a conference coming up every September, or every fall, I should say, this year in 2024. It's in September. So, man, come to the conference, get signed up, and, man, we're going to hopefully see some really good church growth out of that conference. Thanks.